We're very excited to begin a new Gemara, new tractate, a new chapter. And as you can see, we're using a new format. I used to record these shiurim on my phone, and now I'm actually using Zoom on my computer, so that way I can share a screen and you can follow along with the Gemara on the screen itself. So I hope this is helpful, and I would appreciate feedback on the clarity of the sound, the audio of the video, whether this is a good new format or we should go back to the old format using the phone. As I mentioned in the last class, when we concluded the Tractate Sanhedrin, the new chapter we're choosing now to study in our daily Gemara is the last chapter of the tractate Yoma. Yoma, which translates as the day, is a tractate dedicated to discussing Yom Kippur. Now, the tractate itself, is comprised of 8 chapters, and the first 7 are dedicated to describing what happened in temple times, in the temple on Yom Kippur. It's a very lengthy, intricate, detailed description, fascinating description actually, of what went on in the temple times on Yom Kippur. And the entirety of the service in Yom Kippur was done by the high priest. So anything that was done, all the ordinary offerings, plus all the special offerings from Yom Kippur, which were plenty, all had to be done by one man, the high priest. The day was packed. He was running from here to there, changing his clothing, going to mikveh, washing his hands, washing his feet, all kinds of offerings, going to the Holy of Holies, and then coming out and going to the altar. Very, very busy day. And in fact, actually, the preparation started a week before, preparing for this day of Yom Kippur. So I encourage you to check out those first 7 chapters in the Tractate Yoma. Even if you're not going to learn the entirety of the Gemara with all of the complex back and forth, as the Gemara does, I would certainly recommend looking at the first 7 chapters just at the Mishnah level. Even if you don't learn the Gemara, just the Mishnah itself, describing the details of what the high priest has to do, is a very, very fascinating discussion. I encourage you to have a look at that. What we're looking at here is the 8th chapter of Yoma. And the reason we chose it is because it's been our tradition, I guess, if you will, the last few years, we're doing our daily Gemara, that the Talmud we learn has either one of 2 things. Either it has some practical relevance to everybody today. That was, some halachic practical application. And the other is we choose Gemaras that are midrashic, and that they have lessons for us to learn, and moral and ethical kind of things. And that was like, for example, the last track that we learned, Sanhedrin, the last chapter there was midrashic in nature. We learned about the coming of Mashiach and the inspiration about that, and the world to come, and the lessons we learned from all that stuff in life today, and working towards the goal of bringing the ultimate revelation of Mashiach as described at great length in those 100 or so classes. Before that, we learned Menachos, also on YouTube. We selected the passage in Menachos discussing the laws of tefillin, mezuzahs, and writing a Sefer Torah that also has practical application. This last tractate of Yoma has both of these virtues. It starts off with the halacha of fulfilling Yom Kippur till today, fasting, not wearing leather shoes, and all of that stuff. That's discussed in the beginning of this chapter. And then the chapter concludes with a discussion on teshuvah. So it has the other end. It's kind of midrashic, I guess, in nature, and that there's inspiration for teshuvah, the virtues of teshuvah, and how one accomplishes teshuvah, and the various levels of teshuvahs. So this chapter kind of fits both criteria of what we've been studying here at this class: the halachic first, and then in this case, the halacha around Yom Kippur. It's practical application for us today as we observe Yom Kippur. And even when Mashiach comes and the high priest will be doing his service, we're still going to have to fast on Yom Kippur. So the practical element is not going to go away with the coming of Mashiach, maybe soon. And likewise, it has the moral inspirational element to it as we get to the end in terms of discussing teshuvah, the virtues of teshuvah, inspiration for teshuvah, levels of teshuvah, how to accomplish teshuvah, and the rest of it. In terms of the halacha, I'm making this caveat now, but I'm probably going to repeat it myself again, that when it comes to actually practicing in reality, so we're going to be discussing, for example, when someone can break their fast in Yom Kippur and how they can break their fast. Having studied this Gemara doesn't give you a license necessarily to decide on your own. It's time for you to eat on Yom Kippur. Even as we learn these laws from the Talmud, and we're going to the best of our ability, bring up-to-date modern halachic decisions based on these Gemaras, nonetheless, when it comes to actually implementing these things, very much recommend speaking to your local Orthodox rabbi. Should you find yourself in a situation where you can hear from the Gemara that there might be a leniency. So I guess the practical element that we're getting from this is, number one, understanding the underpinnings of the laws we're going to observe, but also there's the virtue of knowing how to ask and knowing when to ask. As you learn the laws of Yom Kippur, and when there are loopholes and when there are leeways, and then when there are leniencies, you'll know when and how to ask your question. You'll be more informed as you have this discussion with your rabbi should the situation come up. Okay. Having said that, let's begin this tractate. Yom Kippurim. I should mention that the page is Ayin Gimel Amud Beis 73b. We begin chapter 8. Yom Kippurim, the day of Yom Kippur, Issur is forbidden. 5 things are forbidden to do on Yom Kippur. As we shall learn in the Gemara, the verse states, the nisim of nafshei seichem, and you shall, literally a nisim means you shall pain yourself. You shall put yourself through some pain, exert yourself, at least not pain as in hurt, but pain as in you should afflict, you should impose discomfort on your body. I guess that's a good way of putting it. And the Talmud, later we're going to discuss that we identify 5 things related to the obligation to deny our body of its basic needs. Namely, number 1, achila shtia, forbidden to eat and drink. That's where the fasting comes from. Number 2, vechitza, forbidden to wash. Number 3, sicha, forbidden to smear ointments, perfumes and creams and stuff like that on our body. Number 4, ni'ilas sandal, wearing shoes, leather shoes specifically, as we'll get into, v'tashma shamita, and marital relations. Those are the 5 things that are forbidden to do on Yom Kippur. Each of these things are going to be analyzed in the Gemara as we go forward. But that's the basic outline of our obligation on Yom Kippur, is staying away from these 5 things, denying our body its basic needs on these 5 areas. Eating, drinking, number 1. Number 2, washing. Number 3, sicha, ointments, smearing ointments on our body. Wearing leather shoes, and marital relations. Then the Mishnah says, V'hamelech, the king, V'akala, and the bride, up to 30 days after a wedding, Yirchatzu Pneihem, should wash their faces. King, as Rashi points out, you can see it here on the side. Melech, a king, Darka V'shivcha Liyasna, it's the way and it's appropriate that he remain. It's his praise that he be beautiful. Shneimar, as the verse reads, Melech b'yafyav, a king in his glory, but techzen enecha is how your eyes shall see it. The king should always have a good look about him, so therefore he washes his face even in Yom Kippur. And likewise, Akala, tzichanoi, Akala needs beauty, so that she'll be cherished by her husband. In other words, when they just get married and are used to each other, they haven't been living together for so long, she should look pretty for him all the time. And therefore, for 30 days following her marriage, she's still called a kala in this regard. So 2 exceptions to the rule in terms specifically of washing the face, that's the king, and king always, and a bride 30 days after a wedding. V'hachaya, and a woman who just gave birth, tinnelas, a sandal, should wear shoes. Because being cold, as Rashi tells us, atzina kashala, being cold is no good for her. These are the words of Rabbi Lezer. Rashi explains to us, the words of Rabbi Lezer are the last 3 things. The exemption of a king washing his face, the exemption of the bride washing her face for 30 days after a wedding, and the exemption of the one who just gave birth to wear shoes. But as the Mishnah continues, the sages disagree and say that even a king should not wash his face, even a bride within 30 days should not wash her face, and even someone who gave birth should not wear leather shoes. Now, with respect to someone who just gave birth and eating on Yom Kippur, that's going to come up later. We'll discuss that in some detail. But nonetheless, the halacha remains like Rabbi Lezer, in that kings are exempt from what they're allowed to wash their face. They're exempt from that prohibition. Likewise, a kala, a bride, is allowed to wash her face for 30 days. And likewise, someone who gave birth for 30 days can wear, 30 days after giving birth, can wear leather shoes because being cold is not good for her. And therefore, she should wear leather shoes. So the halacha remains like Rabbi Lezer rather than Chachamim, the sages. Okay. Now the Mishnah continues. So far, 2 things from the Mishnah. The Mishnah first stated the 5 things that are prohibited in Yom Kippur. Then it stated a dispute with respect to the 3 exemptions. king, bride after 30 days washing face, and a woman who just gave birth 30 days wearing shoes. The dispute between the sages and the Belezer, halachas like Belezer, as we just noted. And now the third statement from the Mishnah is one who eats the amount of a big date, kamoya, its size, the kigare noiseha, including its seeds. Someone who eats on Yom Kippur that amount. Vashoisen, one who drinks, malalugmov, the amount of a full cheek, means 1/2 of one's mouth full, one cheek. Chiyuv, at that point, one is liable for having eaten and drunk on Yom Kippur, right? Eating and drinking on Yom Kippur is the first of the 5 things that one is prohibited to do. So one who ate the amount of a large date, which is roughly, the Shulchan Aruch says that a large date is a little bit smaller than a little bit smaller than the halachic measurement of a kabetza, which is the size of an egg, and a kabetza is 2 zaysim, which is 2 olives. So it's measurements upon measurements upon measurements, and what they are exactly is complicated, but it's about 1.9 ounces, roughly. That's how much this date is around. So someone who eats that amount, and likewise someone who drinks that amount of half the cheek, chayav is liable. Now you already see a distinction between food and drink, and that drink is dependent on each person is different, right? Because each person's cheek is different in size. And when it comes to food, there's a universal size for everybody, the size of the big date. Keseves hagasa. So you already see the distinction, and that's something that the Gemara is going to discuss later. That someone who eats that amount, size of a large date, one who drinks the amount of half their cheek, chayav is liable. Kol ha'oichlin, 4th statement now from the Mishnah. Kol ha'oichlin, all foods, mitzdarfen, combine l'keseves to reach the amount of a large date to keseves, meaning if I ate a tiny amount, say a 1/4 of an ounce, and then ate another 1/4 of an ounce, and then another 1/4 of an ounce, another 1/4 of an ounce, all those little quarters combine to make me liable if they all combined reach the size of keseves, as we shall discuss later. That's only if they're eaten with a certain amount of time frame. But if there's a certain amount of time frame between the two eatings, and they don't combine. All this stuff has practical halachic application, which we'll discuss later, but I'm just putting out the overarching rules here. The chol hamalshin, all drink, but start from combine l'mola lublov to reach the half a cheek that makes one liable. So if I drank a little bit, all those little bits I drink combine, again, within a certain amount of time frame, they combine to make me liable if they all combined reach the amount of half my cheek, of one cheek full of half my mouth. But eating and drinking aim and do not combine. So if I ate a half an ounce, or let's say an ounce, and then I drank an ounce, the two combined would be 2 ounces, which is the size of the big date. I'm still not liable because the food and the drink are of a separate nature, and they don't combine together to make me liable in their totality. It's food that combines with food, and drink that combines with drink, but not the two together. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Essentially 4 statements. 1, listing the 5 things prohibited in Yom Kippur. Number 2, the dispute over the exemptions. King, bride, washing their face. And then a woman who gives birth, putting on shoes. The second statement is the dispute between Rabbi Lezer and Chachamim about that. And the Rabbi Lezer, the one who permits this exemption for these 3, that's the halacha. Number 3 is describing the amounts one needs to eat and drink in order to be liable on Yom Kippur. For eating, the amount is size of a large date, and for drinking, the amount is a full cheek, half a mouth. And the 4th statement from the Mishnah is that food combines together to add up to the prohibited amount. Drink combines together to add up to the prohibited amount, but eating, food, and drink do not combine to each other to add up to the amount required to be liable. Okay, so now comes the Gemara. The Gemara first analyzes, of course, the very, very first statement. The first of these 4 statements, which again, we're going to analyze each of these things in depth as we go along. But the first of the statements is, it's forbidden to eat, drink, wash, put ointments on, put shoes on, and enter marital relations. The choice of words here is forbidden. So says the Gemara this, Issur, it's merely forbidden. there is it's not just forbidden, there is a punishment of excision. Eating on Yom Kippur and drinking on Yom Kippur and violating any of these 5 prohibitions is not just merely a question of you did something that's forbidden. It's actually a question of being liable in the hands of God for excision. Excision means that a person's not put to death by the court, but it means God does so. And excision doesn't just have a physical connotation that it causes physical death, but it actually has a spiritual, that this one's soul is very deeply cut off from the divine. So it's a very, very serious issue here. It's not just a question of forbidden. And therefore the Gemara's first question is, that's all? It's forbidden? That's it? Oh, there's Kadis. There is this intense, highest form of punishment that the Torah delineates is Kadis, is this excision of the body and soul. Karet, with the Sephardic pronunciation. So why does the Mishnah choose to say forbidden when seemingly it should have said someone who does this is chayiv karet, is liable and is punished by the hands of heaven for this excision, with this excision? So says the Gemara, Rabbi Ila. Rabbi Ila says, the Item and others say, Rabbi Yirmiyah, it's the name of her, and it's Rabbi Yirmiyah who said it. Loi nitzricha, this statement that it's forbidden is not needed for the issue of karet, but to add another law. Ella rather Chatzi Shiur, for one who eats half the requisite amount, meaning to say as follows. The Mishnah in its 4th statement stated that one who eats the amount of a large date, or one who drinks a cheekful, is liable for punishment for having violated the prohibition of eating on Yom Kippur. But what if one ate half of that? Is it permissible? And that's why the Mishnah opens up the word Issur. It's forbidden. It's forbidden even though you're not liable. In the language of the Gemara, it's Potter aval Issur. You're exempt from the punishment, but it's absolutely forbidden. So the prohibition of eating and drinking in Yom Kippur is the tiniest amount, any morsel of food, any drop of liquid. But in order to be liable for punishment for having eaten on Yom Kippur, the exact punishment we said before is kares, but there are others as well. If we'll talk about that future, that if one ate by accident, then they have to bring a carbon. Actually, they forgot it was Yom Kippur or something like that, and they have to bring an offering in the temple. And that offering is only required to bring if one ate the minimal amount. But nonetheless, eating less than that is still forbidden. And therefore, the Mishnah specifically uses the language of forbidden to tell you that there is an eating which is forbidden even though you're not liable. And namely, Chatzi Shiur, one who eats, literally Chatzi Shiur means half the amount. That doesn't just mean half only. It could be a quarter, it could be anything. Anything less than the amount that one is liable for, it is still Issur, it's still forbidden. And that's why the Mishnah specifically uses that language to tell us that any amount is forbidden, even though you haven't reached the amount of liability for punishment as described at the end of the Mishnah. Now the Talmud introduces us to a dispute, and this dispute is going to become the subject for a little while going forward. But today, at least, we're just going to introduce the dispute and give the theoretical halachic underpinnings of this dispute based on a talk from the Rabbi, as he's quoting the famous Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef Rosen, who's actually a teacher of the Rabbi. Well, one of the teachers, I suppose is the right way to say it. The Rabbi got smicha, the Rabbi got ordained as a rabbi from the Rabbi, amongst others. Okay, so it says the Gemara like this. Hanicha, all is well. It is right to say that the Mishnah uses the language of Issur, the Mishnah uses the language of forbidden to tell us that even someone who eats less than the requisite amount for liability, it's still forbidden to eat that. Lamanda Omar, that works well if you go with the view, Chatzi Shiur, that one who eats less than the required amount to be liable, Issur min Torah, is biblically forbidden. Meaning to say, this view is as follows, that even though the Torah says you're not liable until you eat a certain amount, it's still forbidden to do even less than an amount. And a good example is the Alter Rebbe writes that this dispute and the halacha therein, the halacha is that it's that Chatzi Shiur is also min Torah, at least according to the Alter Rebbe, the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad. His view, we go with this view, which I believe that's the accepted view, that Chatzi Shiur is also min Torah, that eating half the amount, eating less than the amount required to be liable is still forbidden by biblical mandate. which means like this. And the Alter Rebbe actually writes that this is true across the board for any time the Torah says, any time the Torah says, this is in the end of Siman Tafish Yud Beis, in Hilchos Yom Kippur, 612, right at the end. He says, even someone who ate a little bit or drank a little bit, this is forbidden biblically, and the same thing is true of any biblical prohibition. Where the Torah gives an amount, even a tiny drop is still forbidden biblically. What this means is like this. Let's just take, for example, stealing. So there is a certain amount one has to steal in order to be obligated to return the stolen object. It's shava prota. It's a tiny, tiny amount. Maybe it's, let's just say it's 5 cents. I think it's less than 5 cents, but let's just say for argument's sake it's 5 cents. Okay, so one who stole 5 cents is required to return it. But does that mean I'm allowed to steal 2 cents? God forbid. I'm forbidden to steal any amount, even a half a cent. But it just means that I'm not responsible to return it. Even though it's forbidden, biblically speaking, don't steal any amount, even if it's a half a cent. So likewise here, eating on Yom Kippur is forbidden, even biblically speaking, any amount. But I'm not liable for the punishments Torah delineates unless I ate a certain amount. In this case, date palm or drinking up to a large date or drinking up to a cheekful. So that is one view. And then the Mishnah is always right with the Mishnah. But if you can see my mouse pointing at the word Ella, according to the view which says that biblically speaking, not only is one not liable until they eat a certain amount, but they're actually not in violation, which means, according to this view, eating a tiny drop of food in Yom Kippur, which is less than the size of a large date, is permissible, biblically speaking. What can you say? What can you say to explain this Mishnah? The Mishnah opens up with Issur, it's forbidden, which implies there's a prohibition, even if you don't reach liability. So that's only true if you're of the opinion that eating less than the amount of liability is indeed forbidden, biblically speaking. But if eating less than the required amount is not forbidden, then why is the language of the Mishnah also forbidden? And before the Gemara gets to the answer, the Gemara first introduces who are the disputants. For we've been taught, Chatzi Shiur, one who only violates in half measures. He hasn't violated completely. He only stole 1 cent, less than the full 5 cents. I don't know if it's actually 5 cents, but let's just say for argument's sake it's 5 cents. Or in the case of Yom Kippur, one who only ate a quarter of an ounce. Rabbi Yochanan says, this is biblically forbidden. But Reish Lakish says, biblically speaking, it's permissible to eat less than that amount of a large date, or to drink less than the amount of a full cheek. If that's the case, why does the Mishnah use the language Issur, forbidden, when seemingly, biblically speaking, it's permissible? And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan, the Mishnah works well with Rabbi Yochanan, who is indeed of the view that eating less than the requisite amount for liability is still forbidden. But according to Reish Lakish, who's of the view that eating less than the requisite amount for liability is indeed permissible, what can he say of the language chosen in the Mishnah, when the Mishnah says Issur, it's forbidden, implying that there is a prohibition even when there's no liability? Answers the Gemara, Reish Lakish agrees, Issur midrabanan, it's prohibited from the sages. Which means like this. Everybody agrees that eating a tiny morsel of food on Yom Kippur is absolutely forbidden. And everybody agrees that once you eat the requisite amount, eating the size of a date palm and drinking the size of half my mouth, everybody agrees that once you hit that amount, you're liable for the punishments prescribed in the Torah. The question is, under what law is it forbidden for me to eat less than the amount of liability? Drinking less than half my cheek, drinking liquid less than the amount of half my cheek, and eating less than a kaiseves. Is it a biblical prohibition, Rabbi Yochanan's view, or is it a rabbinic prohibition, Reish Lakish's view? But everybody agrees it's forbidden to eat or to do anything that Torah prohibits, even if you don't reach the amount of liability. The question is if that prohibition is biblical or rabbinic in nature. Taking it to the example of stealing less than 5 cents, if that's the actual amount. I don't think it is. I think it's even less, but let's just say it's 5 cents. Stealing less than 5 cents, is that prohibited biblically, or is it prohibited rabbinically? That's the dispute at the moment. And God willing, tomorrow the Gemara is going to get into first questioning the legitimacy of Rish Lakish's opinion that it's only a rabbinic prohibition. And then after that, the Gemara is going to get into more details surrounding this dispute. But I just want to add, because I mentioned that I would give a little idea from the Rebbe, quoting his teacher, the Rogachover, the famous Rogachover, who says like this: what's the difference between these two? What's the underlying halachic arguments between these two as to whether or not it's a biblical prohibition to eat less than the amount required for liability, or is it a rabbinic prohibition? So the dispute comes down to when the Torah says you may not eat X amount on Yom Kippur. Is that a essential unit? It's a singular unit. Torah says don't eat the amount of a date. Or is it a unit comprised of much smaller units? So for example, when you say, let's say 2 ounces is forbidden. When a person eats half that amount, is the person who ate half that amount, is that person eating halfway up to it? In other words, I've eaten almost up to the thing. Or do I say, look, you didn't eat the full amount, it's not there. Trying to think of a way to put this. Is the 2 ounces an intrinsic unit? It's a singular unit. And if you only eat half of it, then it's as if you didn't eat anything. Or do you say this unit of 2 ounces is the composition of a bunch of small little drops of water, and therefore when you drink, every time you drink another drop, you're getting closer to the ultimate unit? If that's the case, if the unit that the Torah says is forbidden is just a unit comprised of much smaller units, and every time you eat a tiny drop, you're getting closer to the full unit, and therefore it's completely forbidden. On the other hand, if you say that the unit is, Torah says this is a unit, it's a self-standing essential unit, not because it's comprised of other smaller units, but because it's an essential unit. And if you don't have that essential unit, you haven't done anything. I hope that's somewhat clear. It's a subtle idea, but that's the underpinnings of the dispute as explained by the Rogachover. It's quoted in the Rebbe, and many, many applications and different ways of understanding Talmud based on this chakira, this, two sides to the coin. Is a unit described by Torah an essential unit, and therefore not, unless you have the full unit, you haven't done anything? Or is the unit just the composition of a bunch of smaller units? And if I did eat some less than the smaller units, I'm still in prohibition because I've got halfway to the full unit. All right, hope that was somewhat clear. Thank you for joining us. Again, I'd love to hear your feedback on the new method and tell me if the audio and video is clear. And looking forward to our next year, God willing.